My name is Isaac, Isaac, biblical spelling, Lester, Lester. I was born in Florida, outside of Orlando, in a community called Eatonville community. It was all African Americans who were the officers in that community. And the other part of my raising was in New York City. I was there because my my mother and father became ill. So my older brothers, took them to New York with them. And one brother and myself were the youngest. So we stayed in boarding school down there. And that's how we got our education. He was drafted into the Navy. And of course, I was interested in schools. I stayed in school until I graduated. Then I moved all over New York and so on. It was a community. It was the first American black community that was certified in the United States. It was done in 1887, I believe, somewhere around that, like that. Mm-hmm. Mayor, chief police, all the civical, elements that they needed to run the community. Well, that was the first place in the whole United States to do that.
Did you attend church while you were in New York?
Yes. Every Sabbath.
What was your church there?
Ephesus. On Lenox and 123rd Street. My family had been Adventists for a long time. In fact, we became Seventh-day Adventists in 1889. It was in 1971. I was pastoring in New York, and I wanted to get my youngest daughter out of Atlantic Union College because she didn't care for the atmosphere there. So, since her mother had gone to Oakwood and others of my children had gone to Oakwood, I told her, if you are willing to go to Alabama, I'll try to get a call down that way. And fortunately, I was given 2 calls, one for South Atlantic and one for this conference. Well, the 2 were wedded together when I came. So you did not come just to be the pastor of Riverside Chapel, but you came to be also chaplain of the hospital. So I was both chaplain and pastor. I met Ike when I met Isaac Johnson and Marie before I came down here to pastor. You see, your grandfather and my oldest brother, they went to Oakwood at the same time. So in my travels and in our travels, we ran into Isaac Johnson and Marie and just became good friends. When I came down here, yes, he was in the administrative end of it, and I was, of course, in the pastoral work. I thought it was, you know, very active, and I was satisfied. I, of course, was a little surprised when Elder Dudley, who was the president of the conference, invited me to come, and Elder Robert Woodfork invited me at the same time to come to South Atlantic. But Elder Dudley, the president, offered me a church, or offered me a location nearer to Oakwood. And I was seeking to be as near my youngest daughter as I possibly could. So I accepted the call to Riverside. But you know, but it took some, you know, both men were open with me and made me an offer. But as I say, Elder Dudley's offer was more attractive since it was nearer to Oakwood. See, I left Riverside as its pastor in, I believe it was about 74, about 78. I left. Riverside was still practicing medicine, and it was at that time a black hospital, and that was the situation with the chapel. But the history of Riverside is very peculiar in that there's an older church in Nashville, Hillcrest. That was the church I was called to originally, but the pastor who was at Hillcrest had received a call, but he decided to decline the call. So the pulpit that Elder Dudley thought I was going to have, it was closed. So Elder Dudley came to me and said, Elder Lester, I might disappoint you, but the only possible place I can put you as near to Oakwood that has a church of the responsibility that can use your experience. So I said, okay, I came to be with you, so I'm here. And that was how I got to Riverside instead of Hillcrest. Well, I came and I left Riverside. The Lord guided me to make some changes. Riverside needed a plumbing job, you know, because all the water was cold. And how are you going to baptize people in cold water? So I got the congregation together, and of course they were very nice. And we put hot and cold water in. So that's how Riverside got its original, the old church. See, Riverside did not burn till quite a few years later. I think I was in Memphis or Louisville because I only pastored two other churches after Riverside.
And so you heard about it when you were in Memphis?
Yes, they called me. See, the members still were. It was not a large church, but it had a lot of influence. It was the second most tithe-producing church in the conference when I was there. And of course, it's very interesting to me that when I came to Riverside, Elder Dudley felt he needed 3 older, experienced men to take some of the responsibility. And so he called Eric Ward from California, Fred Crow from Kansas City, Kansas, and myself from New Rochelle, New York. So that's how the 3 of us came within, I guess, about 10 to 12 months of each other. So it was sort of, he was building his conference with experience, responsibility of people who had a background of doing challenging things, let me say. Well, I mentioned to you the plumbing responsibility, and there were some other things that were not, that it is unnecessary for me to speak about.
Oh.
See, really, Fred Crow was at Riverside when I came, but he had only been there about 6 months. And Elder Crow had a lot of administrative experience himself. Eric Ward was evangelism in large places. And of course, I had some success in evangelism. So that's a combination of skills or talents that Elder Dudley, I guess he wanted, but that's what he got. At the Old Riverside, I was participating in what was more my specialty at that young age. I guess I was in my mid-40s or late 40s when I came to Riverside. And a lot of the people were old line Seventh-day Adventists, and I guess that's where our lives sort of fitted together, because you had one fellow there. In fact, they were all great guys. Norman Simons had, ended his administrative work at Riverside, and there was another retired fellow there, T.T. Frazier, and there was another fellow that, in fact, I bought an old house from when I came. He was the treasurer. He had been the treasurer of the conference, but retired by that time. He was Elder Ford, and so really, Charles, well, the old church that I was pastoring burned down while I was in Memphis or Louisville, one, two, and so Elder Butler, when he came, the members got together and decided, since the church had burned down, they had to have a new church. Forgive me, that's not as accurate as it should be. They built the church and emptied the old church, and that's when it burned down. It was not being used at that time. Yeah, I had tried to build a new church for them, but there was an unpleasant odor of some of the debt that was in some of our conference churches, and these were very conservative people. T.T. Frazier, Dr. Dent, people like that, and so they discouraged growth. In fact, Riverside was really pulled out of Hillcrest, because Hillcrest at that time was the only African American Seventh-day Adventist church in the city. So what the medical staff there, they decided to create a church, and that's how Riverside was born, because they were being held, they felt, too long in service over at Hillcrest, and they pulled out because, you see, they had time limits. You had sick people in the hospital. They needed lunch at a specific hour, and so the staff of Riverside got together, employees, and they made the decision to, put together a church. And that's how Riverside was born. But that happened before I came. The church, I was not the first pastor of the church. There had been several pastors before me. I was never a part of that, except that, that was during the time I was in process of leaving, because Elder Dudley understood my desire to evangelize, because Riverside had never had an evangelistic spirit, because being professionals, they were more comfortable with professionals, but I wasn't. But this was sometimes after those decisions were made by them. So when I came in, I said, well, we need a new church. It was too small at that time because on Sabbath you could hardly find a seat. But it wasn't, it wasn't that many seats available. So I just started doing, an evangelistic path. And by the grace of God, I had baptized during my stay there. I had baptized more than any other pastor who had been there. And so with the old church being old and so forth, the General Conference was discussing, because that was a General Conference property. So they started discussing getting rid of Riverside. Did you ever meet Joe Winston?
I believe so.
Yeah, Joe was the administrator of the hospital, and Joe had proposed a plan to keep the hospital in the under the guidance of Seventh-day Adventists, because that's why it was created. But what happened was, with the attitude of the General Conference, they wanted to sell it. And of course, they had the deeds and everything. So they pushed it so hard that Dudley resisted as long as he possibly could. But I guess you've heard the old saying, money talks. And that's what happened. I've learned that being very careful with people and not showing any inclination to be afraid of face ventures. The people, began to understand that this is God's church, not yours. And as a result, I was fortunate enough to run a tent campaign on the south side of Nashville. And that's where we baptized, I guess, about 20 to 22 people. And that was a massive inflow during those days. So that's what happened. I was born, and the earliest part of my life was spent being born and spent in a small black town called Eatonville, Florida. The educational process began with the church school that my father supported in Orlando. We used to have to walk at least 10 miles each way to school each day. And I was too young to be left home alone, so the teacher allowed me to come with my brothers and sisters. So hearing 8 grades being taught by that wonderful teacher and the older students, I guess that gave me a learning curve that was to my advantage. Well, my hobby was reading. Hearing all of that information, my joy became reading. So I'd read a lot. I met Eileen, who is today Miss Lester. I met her when I was stationed in the Army in Camp Atterbury, Indiana.
If I'm correct, wasn't she from the Ohio area herself?
But they were a singing group.
Right.
And they traveled through Indiana. Camp Atterbury was in Indiana. The time I came to Nashville, I was invited to this conference by Elder Dudley.
Right. Okay.
And that was in 1974. Yeah.
Were there any other offices or positions that you would have liked to have held, or you thought about it?
No, pastoring was my joy.
Was it? Okay.
Because I pastored Youngstown, Ohio, Roanoke, Virginia, and other places. You see, I was in boarding school.
Okay.
And in boarding school, boarding school in Florida.
Okay.
So it was when I was out of school that I came to be with my family part of the time. And I think that's about as much. There were 7 children.
7 children.
I have the second child in the family was a teacher. She's retired now, of course. The third child was a human services director for locations where a Walmart center.
Oh.
My baby daughter and the son next to him, both of them are attorneys.
Okay.
They are great-grands, but that's information my wife keeps up with.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay.
I pastored Riverside for 4.5 years.
Okay.
And when I left, I went to Memphis, Tennessee. There was a little church in Memphis that had just been organized, that Elder Dudley wanted someone with experience to take over, and it today is called New Covenant in Memphis. It's a church with about 450, 500 members today. All of my churches were my favorite churches because I left there and went to Louisville, and I stayed in Louisville just under 10 years, and that was the last church that I pastored. The other part of my ministry was spent in pastoral ministry and a short while administrative work in the conference. Most of the young ministers today seem to enjoy the preaching part of ministry. We enjoyed visiting, the homes, because that's the only way you can really get to know people, is to visit them in their homes.